G'day everyone, Viv here. I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back to our series on learning Saga. This is episode 4 where we're talking about fatigue. So in episode 3, I alluded to fatigue that was there on the table. How do we accumulate fatigue? How does it get used? And how do we get rid of it? Now there's 4 ways in which fatigue is accumulated, and I spoke about some of those in episode 3. I accumulate fatigue by moving a unit more than once. So for example, if I moved this unit as part of its activation, I then activated the same unit and then moved it again, it would generate a point of fatigue. We saw in episode 3 how fatigue is also earned or generated or accumulated as the result of melee. Now you can see here on the table the 2 units that we had in that conflict before generated fatigue at the end of their melee. I can also generate fatigue as a result of shooting, which we also learnt about in episode 3. I can also generate fatigue if I witness or if I'm close enough to one of my friendly units that gets wiped out. So say for example, here on the table I had this unit standing here, and I had an engagement happening here. This unit fought against the warriors and got wiped out. Any of my friendly units within 4 inches or short would generate a point of fatigue. That would be this unit here, and this unit over here I'm sure will also be able to be allocated a point of fatigue. They're just on. Now I don't worry too much about millimeters, so I want to give this unit a point of fatigue as well. So they're the 4 methods that we generate or accumulate fatigue. 1, as a result of activating more than once. 2, as a result of being engaged in melee. 3, if I shoot at an enemy unit, or 4, if I am within 4 inches of one of my units that gets wiped out in melee. They're the 4 methods in which I accumulate fatigue. So let's just reset our table here, back to how we had it, and we'll talk about how we spend fatigue. So here's my example that I had before. My enemy's unit has 1 point of fatigue, mine has 2 points of fatigue. It's his turn. He activates this unit and declares a move activation, and engages my unit in melee. Now at this point, we'll keep things fairly straightforward. Step 1, he generates his attack dice. He's got 3 warriors, he gets 3 attack dice. I've got 3 warriors, I also get 3 attack dice. I'm not going to choose to play defensively. I'm not going to use any battle board abilities, and neither is my opponent. However, there's some fatigue that can come into play here. So this is where we start to talk about spending fatigue. How is it used? Fatigue can be spent in 4 different ways. 1, it can be spent to reduce the movement of a unit. So for example, let's just set this back again. We'll go back to here. This unit has 1 point of fatigue. It activates and declares a move action to engage my unit in melee. I might then sacrifice that unit's fatigue to reduce its movement from 6 inches down to 4 inches, and subsequently they can no longer engage me in combat. That's one method, reducing my opponent's move distance. The second method is used, or the second and third method is used in melee to either sacrifice my opponent's fatigue to either increase my armor or decrease their armor. So in our example here where we've got this fight going on, we've generated attack dice, we've generated defense dice. I'm not going to play defensively, I'm not using any battle board abilities, neither is my opponent. My opponent now declares that he's going to sacrifice this point of fatigue on my unit to increase his armor by 1 point. So here's a unit of warriors with armor 4, he's increasing it to 5. He's then going to sacrifice the other point of fatigue on my unit to reduce my armor. I can only do either of these options once. So he's increasing his armor once and reducing my armor by 1 point. So his armor now is currently 5. My armor is currently 3. It's dropped from 4 to 3. However, I'm going to sacrifice his fatigue to increase mine back to 4. So you can see I went into this combat with more fatigue than he did, and it's given him an advantage because his armor is now 5, mine is now 4, so he hits me on 4s, 5s or 6s. there's 2 hits, and I hit him on 5s. So there's 1 hit. So 1 for him, 2 for me. I'll roll these up. I didn't save any, so 2 guys die. He gets to save on a 5 or 6. Didn't save any, so 1 guy dies. I've got 2 casualties, he's got 1 casualty. I lose the combat and must withdraw 4 inches. The 4th method of spending fatigue is during the shooting activation. So if I'm shot at by an enemy unit that has fatigue, I can sacrifice the fatigue on that shooting unit to increase my armor by 1 point. So there's the 4 methods for accumulating fatigue. There's the 4 methods for spending fatigue. And we spoke earlier on in the previous episode about using the rest activation to remove fatigue from my unit. Fatigue, never very good to have. However, sometimes it can be good to activate a unit more than once to do multiple things with it. So there's a trade-off that you need to make. And as the rulebook states, weigh your decisions carefully. It's probably worth noting as well about how much fatigue a unit can actually generate. We spoke about accumulating fatigue. There is no limit to how much fatigue a unit can accumulate. However, there is a certain point when that unit will become exhausted and you can only activate it to rest. You can't activate it to move or shoot once that unit is exhausted. Different types of units become exhausted at different points. Hearthguard will become exhausted once they've got 4 points of fatigue. Warriors, 3 points. Levies, 2 points. So at this point in this example I've got here on the table, I've got a unit of warriors that has 2 points of fatigue. I want to activate those warriors, so making sure that I've got dice on my battle board to activate them. I'll sacrifice 1 dice, activate them, and move them forward. Take their fatigue with them. I'm then going to activate those guys a second time to engage this unit of warriors over here. Everyone's going to make it into combat. Now, because this is their second activation, they get a point of fatigue, bringing their total to 3 points of fatigue. The unit is now exhausted. It is engaged in melee, so it needs to finish its turn. However, because it is exhausted at the beginning of the melee, the number of attack dice that it would normally generate, in this case 4 warriors, 1 dice each is 4 dice, I would lose half of my attack dice because the unit is exhausted. The combat would take place, my opponent would spend fatigue, I'd spend fatigue, etc. And at the end of the melee, that unit would also then generate a point of fatigue afterwards. So fatigue limits can accumulate as much as I want. But at that point when I become exhausted, if I am not already engaged in an action or an activation, then I can only be activated to rest. I can't activate that unit to move it, I can't activate it to shoot it. As we've just seen, and as I've just said, if I do activate a unit and it subsequently during that turn becomes exhausted, in this example here in melee, it has the negative effect of losing half of its attack dice. So that brings us to the close on the episode talking about fatigue. It's an interesting mechanic. I like how it can influence how combat works. You don't really want to go into combat with too much fatigue because you risk either becoming exhausted or your opponent using it to his advantage. I like how it slows units down. You're just not continually activating the same unit and bounding across the field and causing carnage. You've got to take a break every now and then. So I hope you're enjoying the series on Saga. I'm really enjoying making it. I'm looking forward to getting some battle reports out there so you can see some games in motion. It's a bit more fluid when you actually see a full example. Thanks for watching. I hope it's spiking some interest, and I'll catch you next time. See ya.